Okay. Still Mosquitoburg, still 2001. A quotation. That which was created for you will not be missed, and that which you missed was not created for you. So just make yourself a cup of tea and breathe and be. Anonymous. Hundreds upon hundreds of simple empty tin cups with handles were slowly being collected by hundreds upon hundreds of Swamp Water Festival goers who had gathered at Old Man Maccabee's property to participate in the Wampus Cat hunt. The premise of this activity was quite simple. Using tin cups filled with swamp water, the hunters would walk around the swamp under the dim light of the new moon, attempting to coax the Wampus Cat from its hiding spot and lead it back into the giant vat of swamp water on Maccabee's property to be rewarded with a wish. In truth, no one had seen the Wampus Cat since the last day Old Man Maccabee was alive, which was now many years ago. Milo and Mila gave a quick speech, which included features on safety and always using hunting partners. Then Mila fired a miniature starter's pistol that was surprisingly loud, and the hunt was on. Shadow Lucas, Emery, and Emmeline were tripled up as partners. At the sound of the starter's pistol, Shadow Lucas immediately consumed the entire contents of his cup. "What are you doing?" asked Emmeline. Shadow Lucas licked his chops, saying, "Trust me, everyone else is doing this all wrong. It's the vapors that entice that magical cat." "So drink up," concluded Shadow Lucas. The vapors from the twins' own cups were already burning their nostrils as they outstretched their arms to begin pouring the swamp water directly onto the ground. "No!" said Shadow Lucas, startling the girls. Composing himself, and now speaking evenly and calmly, Shadow Lucas stated, "Girls, that would be alcohol abuse, please." The girls handed over their tin cups, and Shadow Lucas promptly drank both, saying, "Yep, that's the spot." Now the girls noticed the tails of his leather coat oscillating in the dead calm breeze of the evening, followed by him saying, "Ah, the tails told me, yes, they told me. Go this way." Following behind Shadow Lucas, the girls were whispering to each other. Emmeline said, "That was totally sus." Emery responded, but if we can find this stupid cat and we get a wish, like a genie in a bottle wish." If only Emery knew how much truth was staked in her words. Now having walked a great distance south from Old Man Maccabee's property, the trio was at the northern reaches of the great Ickybog Swamp. After several more minutes of walking, Shadow Lucas led them to a dirt path that was bordered by tall and ancient banyan trees, and their roots and branches entangled each other and were ensnared deep in the path. Shadow Lucas spun on his heels, facing the twins with a wild smile, and saying, "This is where I was derailed last year. I deduce that these trees are making some kind of protected gateway, and the Wampus Cat has been living beyond this point. The thing is, I think it has some type of, open sesame style lock. Do you girls know any rhymes or sayings?" The twins placed their tin cups on the ground and stood up again, grabbing their foreheads, now realizing that they were sufficiently dizzy simply from the swamp water vapors. The girls faced each other and began the hand clap routine in unison with the perfect cadence of the lyrics. "Ducks in lemons, meat in worms, kiss a boy to make him squirm, fight a giant, burn a witch, get your butt out of the ditch." The wise and ancient banyan trees could clearly discern that this was not the language of grown folks. However, it did amuse them, and since they were in good humor tonight, they slowly creaked and groaned, opening the way on the path. The trio, carrying a tin cup of vapors each, letting Shadow Lucas's leather coattails give directions, they soon found the fabled feline. The Wampus Cat was asleep, with its massive head cradled across its huge crisscross paws. Shadow Lucas knelt down, waving the twins closer to the animal's face, as he put his cupful of vapors under the Wampus Cat's nose. Emery and Emmeline crouched and also extended their tin cups full of vapors. Ethereal green mist began accumulating around the Wampus Cat's head, specifically his eyes. The trio all stood up and backed away quickly. The large cat's eyes opened, glowing green, and looked at each of them in turn before saying in a growly, cello-like voice, "It's not nice to tease. I could kill all of you right now, even before you two drew your special silver weapons." Emery and Emmeline's prior experience with a large supernatural animal, the shimmery licorice dog, was quite different than this and left them feeling taken aback. Being highly skilled in the arts of both double talk and negotiation for survival, Shadow Lucas soon had the Wampus Cat up on all 6 legs with the promise of copious amounts of corn liquor waiting at Old Man Maccabee's property. As the traveling party exited the large banyan tree gate, the Wampus Cat looked at the night sky and saw the new moon. Slowly, a devilish grin split the feline's face nearly in half. Ceremoniously, the Wampus Cat patted the swampy ground. Voices rang out loudly in shock and alert around Maccabee's property. "Someone found it! The Wampus Cat! Hey, look! Be careful! Those girls found it!" Very quickly, every participant in the Wampus Cat hunt were gathered at a distance, just close enough to feel safe, while still getting a good look at the massive feline. Emery and Emmeline walked over to the large vat of swamp water and, like models, began waving their arms to display the Wampus Cat's prize. The Wampus Cat began strutting as if it were being treated like royalty towards the vat and lowered its broad head and began to drink. Almost as if everyone had stopped breathing, there was no noise except for the gentle lapping of the Wampus Cats emptying the vat of swamp water. Suddenly, visible and audible to everyone present, a green wave pulsed out in all directions, including up from the Wampus Cat, gently touching everyone and passing to the next person, and continued for miles before eventually dissipating. As the wave pulsed over Milo, one of the only people around to have seen the Wampus Cat since the last go-around, he looked at his newly acquired goosebumps and whispered to Mila, "Did you feel that?" Mila was busy looking at the interaction between the raven-haired girls and the Wampus Cat, while absent-mindedly saying, "Feel what?" There are times in life when the knowledge and experience gained from hindsight would truly had better served a person as foresight instead. The scene at Old Man Maccabee's property this night, under a new moon, nearing the hour of midnight, was exactly this. The Wampus Cat was sitting on its haunches in front of a now empty vat of swamp water and next to a small dead tree. Emery and Emmeline were both standing very close to the Wampus Cat and shoulder to shoulder of each other. The 3 of them were standing in the basin of a field with a large shed on top of the ridge. Milo and Milo were at the doors of the shed, and hundreds upon hundreds of festival goers encircled the basin of the field, many daring to get as close as possible. Shadow Lucas had blended into the crowd and vanished. Since the twins' prior experience with supernatural animals was the shimmery licorice dog, they felt unafraid, standing so close to the Wampus Cat. The massive feline, with constantly glowing green eyes, broke into a rambling oration, holding everyone's attention, thanking the girls, praising itself, thanking everyone in attendance, but most importantly, sprinkling into its own speech words from the language of grown folks. It seemed that only Milo was noticing this random placement of these words, and he said to himself, "No, something's not right." "And so," said the Wampus Cat, its voice smoothly rumbling and carrying for all present, "you have rightfully caught me and provided payment. What is your wish?" Emery and Emmeline's faces beamed, and their eyes grew large, and their heads felt swimmy from the vat of swamp water behind the Wampus Cat. Milo asked himself out loud, why did it skip the riddles? Emery and Emmeline started the declaration of their wish in unison. We want to go home in... However, the Wampus Cat interrupted, saying one word in the language of grown folks, Akana. Immediately, hundreds upon hundreds and even many more than hundreds of vines and roots sprung from the ground, immobilizing everyone, watching, including the twins. Confused and heads swimming, the girls finished their wish in cadence, but not with the same words. Emmeline said, home in double time. Emery said, home in half the time. The Wampus Cat again smiled a devilish grin so wide that it looked to split the head across as it said, granted. Esme and Jasper, each inside, raised their left arms. The Wampus Cat raised both of its left arms, and with claws fully extended, for Emery and Emmeline, all sound temporarily stopped. Emery and Emmeline saw bright electrified sparkles followed by brilliant white light that quickly went completely black, just as the girls both felt searing heat everywhere on their bodies. The year is now 2051. Plunging deep into the evergreen wilderness on planet Vulpes, there was a blisteringly cold blizzard with raging winds. The Shelby could be seen in the background at a severe off-kilter angle with the middle of a large snowdrift, as if it had fallen directly from the sky like that. Emmeline could feel that her face was warm and wet, and that the swift frozen snowflakes were hitting any exposed skin, stinging like chilled needles, that they were rapidly melting and refreezing to her skin. Emmeline was gasping and on the verge of tears. She was on the ground, sitting in deep snow. Presently, Emmeline realized she could not stand and feared that her legs may be broken. Shifting her weight from side to side, Emmeline realized she was being weighed down by something large and wet. Emmeline was having trouble fully processing what she was seeing, as she weakly asked, Emery? Emery's upward-facing body was laying across Emmeline's lap. Eyes open, with swaths of black hair covered in crystallized blood, Emery made one guttural gurgle which forced deep crimson blood from her mouth, traveling in rivulets down her cheek and neck before quickly congealing to her skin. Emmeline now recalled two massive paws swinging through the air. Emery, wake up! Emmeline pleaded, but Emery did not respond. Emmeline touched her own warm, wet face and looked at her hands. Blood. Grabbing her head as if to start the panic, she felt the jewel and acorn in her hair, and then and their purpose came back to her. Echo, Bijou! Emmeline screamed herself hoarse against the blustering blizzard. Emery, wake up! Cried Emmeline. I'll never call you Smelly ever again! It seemed like an eternity and nothing was happening. Emmeline ripped off her backpack and tore it open. Yes, she said, pulling out the brick phone. Jamming her thumb into the green call button, the line connected, but no one spoke. Emmeline couldn't waste any more time and said, My sister needs help. Please, she's dying. Somewhere, light years from anywhere, the four cosmic androids were hovering at attention around the Mason's massive cooking pot, which was still full of Felix and Felicity's stardust. Lignius and Bijou heard their jewel and acorn. Echo, Bijou! Lignius and Bijou were on opposite sides of the massive cooking pot, facing each other, and immediately they launched into flight. Half a second later, Inferno and Echo were speeding after them. This imbalance in takeoff times caused the massive, heavy cooking pot to rock back and forth wildly, causing fresh stardust to go flying everywhere. Whoa! Said the Mason, as Felix and Felicity danced and sang in the falling stardust. In the evergreen wilderness on planet Vulpes, Emmeline was still sitting in the snow with Emery across her lap. Emmeline suddenly felt very uneasy. Emery could see a tall, cloaked figure holding a sigh. Emery heard a loud metallic swish over the sound of the howling blizzard. Emmeline suddenly felt very sleepy, and right before her eyelids became unbearably heavy, both of the girls saw a multicolored streak flying across the sky. At this moment, The girls thought of their parents, their Aunt Julie, and simply dancing ballet together. Somewhere, light years from anywhere, sorry about that pause. Somewhere light years from anywhere, Death's sigh could be seen hovering next to the great materials pot like a soldier at attention. Lulia, Amatista, and the Mason were warmly greeting Death. Felix and Felicity walked over to Death, smiling broadly. Felix handed Death a cold glass of unsweet iced tea with exactly 4 ice cubes, no more, no less. Felicity held out the open palm of her one hand, presenting a single butterscotch disc candy for Death. "You kids are amazing as always," said Death with a bony grin. Carrying his refreshments, Death drifted over to Doug, who had just set up the hyperplane chessboard. "So," asked Doug, "when was the last time you and I had the opportunity for a game?" "Day number 84, said Death. "Pardon?" asked Doug. "Your wife is right, you know," chided Death. Doug laughed nervously and said, 5 minutes. You're back 5 minutes and being critical already." Death smelled, or attempted to smell, his glass of unsweet iced tea before saying, "No, not at all. I'm just observant." Doug pulled the sides of his face down and released his hands, asking calmly, "Pray tell, what did you observe?" Death rolled the butterscotch disc using his finger bones of his hand, making it travel and flip across his hand before launching it into the air and catching it in his mouth. "Follow me here," said Death. Doug interrupted. "Shall I collect a scribe or a witness first?" Death waved a chalk-white finger at Doug and asked, "Why twins?" Doug sat back in his chair and looked at his cousin before asking, "When was the last time you had a vacation?" Death contorted one frontal orbital bone so it looked like he was raising one eyebrow and stated, "Day number 84. With his facial bone still contorted, Death asked, "Doug, please tell me you haven't forgotten the first day of time?" Doug moved one of his pawns on the third board towards forward 2 spaces and replied, "Of course I haven't forgotten the first day of time." Death moved one of his pawns on the 7th board forward 2 spaces, saying, "So why twins?" Doug exhaled and moved a pawn on the 8th board 1 space and said, "Balance, of course." Death moved a knight out from the back row of the 7th board and declared, "Finally, the meat and potatoes of this entire ordeal. I'm sure, Doug, you and I don't have these problems, but all that fragile mortal life here, there, and everywhere around us." Death waved both of his robed arms wildly in multiple directions as he continued to speak. "Balance." Doug made a move, saying, "Like scales, you mean?" Death made a move and said, "Scales are far too restrictive. They only work on one axis. Come on, man, I'm talking about..." Doug made another move as Death spoke. "I'm talking about real balance. Life is like surfing, all-encompassing, pay attention or you wipe out balance." Death made a move and rested all of his bony fingers, aligned together, saying, "Check." Doug asked, "How am I in check? No way." Death picked up the glass of unsweet iced tea and drew back on the rim, causing the iced tea to spray his teeth and jawbones. "Ah," said Death. "You know, maybe, since Felicity can make iced tea that's this amazing, maybe losing her arm while playing Big Cat with her brother was a check and balance. Almost like someone knows her true power potential." Doug coughed and lost his breath for a moment, and then made a move on the first board. Death made a move and spoke. "Check." "So what are the ones who want everything but everything means nothing to them?" Doug made a move, saying, "Yes, and I have a question also. How did you do that? How did you do what you did to Emery and Emmeline?" Death made a move and chuckled. Trade secret. Besides, continued Death, the Masons' toys took them to safety. Doug made a move and spoke in a very annoyed tone. I cannot believe the audacity of that witch, Esme and Jasper, that occupy the cat right now. Those girls said home in double time, home in half the time, so the girls got sent home double the distance and doubly far ahead in time, while the cat tries to cut them in half. Death made a move and said, it is also ironic that the Masons' toys took them to Jane's Place Tavern. That's classic. Doug shifted his weight several times, examining all 8 chessboards. Death had become a significantly better chess player since the last time they had played. Doug moved a bishop on the second board and said, check. Death moved a pawn on the 7th board, saying, check and mate. Bull, said Doug. Oh, yes, said Death with assurance. Next move, no matter what you move, checkmate. Doug waited with his fingers covering his mouth, and then he moved the queen on the 4th board to the limit of its limit of its ability, but kept his fingertip atop the piece. Doug and Death stared at each other. Finally, Doug quickly ripped his finger away, and nothing happened. Death laughed and laughed. Isn't that interesting, said Death, waving his chalk-white hands from side to side as if presenting evidence in a court of law. Everyone, even you who can stop the very flow of time itself, everyone trusts in the surety of Death's timing. Trusting is the eventuality of mortality. Acceptance, however, is another matter altogether. Doug, do you realize if those two concepts were reversed, I would be revered instead of reviled? I'm just a ferryman, after all. Doug picked up Death's iced tea and sniffed it. When satisfied, he set the glass back down. Death smiled, saying, I'm just high on life, figuratively speaking, of course. Doug looked at the hyperplane boards for a long moment. Death cleared his throat and spoke. Whenever you're ready. I need to get out of here eventually. I have to wash my hair. Doug retorted, It is your turn. Oh, yes, said Death cheerfully, as he moved his king to the 5th board, one space. Pieces on all 8 of the boards started rapidly clicking and clacking in the next move positions until only one remained, and the boards started folding and collapsing on themselves until it became critically dense, imploded, and launched new stars into the heavens. Well played, said Doug. You as well, said Death. So do tell, said Doug. How exactly did you save Jane's twins? Death picked up his iced tea, again drawing against the rim, causing iced tea to spray across his teeth and gums. He said, I cut and remeasure. Doug stated, You would make a terrible carpenter. Taking another draw against the rim of the glass, Death said, The thread of life is not made of wood, but of something more elastic. Yes, said Doug, but how did you do it exactly? First of all, said Death, you have to understand a few facts. Firstly, Emmeline proved a great act of love, being more willing to save her sister than help herself. Secondly, and I'm not exaggerating here, Emery was on the brink, just one moment from being forever lost. So I cut them both short and remeasured Emmeline's time between them both so that they may live. It's actually easiest if it's a pair of twin siblings. Doug looked serious and asked, Rightly, you could have reaped Emery. Death gave Doug a quick salute off the hood of his cloak with 2 chalk-white fingers. Doug's features softened, and he said, How commendable! I'm proud of you. Lulia and Amatista drew near. Amatista asked, What happened to be so deserving of my husband's praise? Death spoke up quickly. Oh, it's just 2 old dogs growling over who can wreck more shop than whom. Lulia prodded the conversation. Perhaps these old dogs would like an ear scratch and a treat? The Mason just made fresh pasta fajoule. Death's facial features contorted as he placed one robed arm behind him, saying, You really know how to twist my arm. Yes, please. Felix, Felicity, and the Mason were already seated at the great table as the other 4 pulled up their chairs. Felicity asked the table, "Who wants garlic bread? Felix and I made it." Death, seated next to Felicity, he took a piece of garlic bread and said, "Bellissimo." "Grazie," replied Felicity. Truly, it had been an eon since this family had had time to properly collect themselves and share a meal while they reveled in the joy of each other's company.